Hello and welcome to Knit Designs. If you're new here, this is a YouTube channel dedicated to everything to do with knitting, where I share my latest knitting projects, record tutorials, and share knitting tips. It's been a while since my last video posted here on YouTube. January, February months were really busy for me. However, that did not stop me from knitting. Unfortunately, I didn't have enough time to also record any videos. But today I would like to bring you up to date with what I've been busy with knitting wise, provide some feedback on the patterns I used and managed to complete, as well as yarn that I used and any challenges I encountered along the way. The show and tell videos are my favorite type of videos to watch on YouTube with regards to knitting projects, especially if it's if we're sharing some new ideas or new yarn that's out there. And learn from each other's experiences. So the first project, which was WIP at the end of 2024, and I managed to complete in January this year, is this jumper from Drops. The pattern comes from the Gun Studio website, and it's a free pattern. The pattern is called Adult Trot, and it's knitted in two types of yarn. Alpaca boucle and kid silk yarn. Despite the pattern being free, I found it well written and simple to follow. I would say it's a beginner level, so if you are not very well experienced with knitting or haven't completed many knitting projects, this pattern was good to follow and to also achieve a good result without having to have extensive skills to complete the project. The only thing I changed about the pattern was the neck. The original pattern design is a folded neck. However, I've decided to make a turtleneck collar, and I think it works a lot better for this jumper because the fabric, in my opinion, is a little bit too thick to create a folded neck. I like folded necks to be maybe in thinner type of yarn instead of using the same yarn as for the main jumper. The sizing of the pattern was also quite good, and I would say it's true to size in my experience. The indicated yarn quantities used for this pattern were also quite good and were true to size. This is all I have left from the yarn, so quite small amount of the alpaca boucle yarn and some kid silk also left. The pattern is mainly stockinette stitch, so the main body of the jumper is knit in stockinette stitch, and the rib is knitted in twisted 1x1 rib. So the stockinette stitch allows for this project to go quite quick because we're not working on any complicated knitting patterns. However, the challenge I found with this project was actually in the yarn. So the yarn challenges was first, number one challenge is the type of yarn the boucle yarn is. So the boucle yarn has these loops, as you can see, all along the main thread. I kept catching these loops with my needle, which meant that I pulled out these little, whatever you call them, loops, curls, whatever. I would end up pulling them out, and that was quite annoying from time to time. Another challenge with this type of yarn, and it also goes for this yarn, is that boucle as well as fluffy effect, as well as the kid silk is quite fluffy yarn. You can see the threads. The yarn, and because of this, the yarn is not very forgiving. If you make a mistake and would like to undo a few rows, or if you slip a stitch, if you change your mind, you need to undo it, made a mistake in calculation, this yarn is unforgiving with that. And the way it doesn't respond well to frogging is because it loses its fluffiness, it loses its texture. So before I started the project, I knitted a sample. It really went well and it was all good. I washed it and dried it and was fine with it. However, what I didn't knit was the 1x1 rib. The jumper's knitted bottom up in separate pieces. So you knit front, then back, and then sleeves all separately, and then sew it all together. So when I started knitting the one by one rib, I found that I made a mistake and I needed to undo it because there was no good way of correcting it without frogging the fabric. And what I found is that when I frogged my knitting, the pattern, the yarn lost its texture a bit. I undid a few rows. The fabric started to become flatter and flatter. So ideally, you've got to know exactly what you're doing, or allow yourself extra yarn for any swatches you need to make, or practice first before knitting the main fabric to make sure that you achieve a nice result with your project. And the other issue I found with this yarn is to do with working these two strands together. So what I often found is that these two, because we've got here a curly boucle yarn and then I've got this kind of individual strand, these two did not blend well together. From time to time I would catch these loops, but also these two strands would come apart, which meant that I would only pick one strand instead of picking both of them together, which again was annoying, and I found I had to pay a little bit more attention to what I was doing, despite the jumper being knitted in the stockinette stitch. Despite the challenges of working with the yarn, I quite like the final result of this jumper. The jumper is very warm and also feels quite soft and nice to touch. It's a little bit itchy on the skin, so especially around the neck area. So I think I will need to wear a cotton turtleneck to prevent the jumper from itching. It's a perfect project for beginner knitters to practice some skills of knitting jumpers, of knitting pieces separately and then putting them together, and working with challenging yarns. Another project which I completed, and it's not based on a pattern, it's a project which I made up myself. It's a hat. So in my earlier videos, I shared a project which I worked on from Rowan. It was a snowflower scarf, and I had a few color yarn left. So I was thinking what to make with that yarn, and I decided to make a hat. This is all I've got left. I've managed to incorporate most of my small leftover yarns into this hat. So originally I was thinking of maybe designing another Fair Isle project, because my snowflower scarf was Fair Isle type of scarf, so Fair Isle knitting. So I thought maybe I do something similar for this hat. So I've got a matching hat to the scarf, but unfortunately I didn't have enough yarn to be able to confidently commit to a project like that without having to buy more yarn. So I decided to go for just simple stripes, and in order to use up the yarn, but also to have a hat which I can wear when it's cold, for walking, running. The project was very simple. I cast on stitches on circular needles and then knitted one by one rib all the way to the required length. And then in the last 3 rows, I reduced the number of stitches by 2. So 2 stitches after every, so a stitch after every 2 stitches, and then tightened at the top to close off the hat. A little trick here I used was using size smaller needles for the bottom one by one rib to make sure that the bottom of the hat doesn't stretch as much, and then I used a larger size needles for the main hat. The yarn I used for this project was felted tweed from Rowan. It's kind of mainly wool yarn, and the type of yarn that doesn't stretch very well. and will not hold shape very well. So it's perfect for things like the Farah scarf are knitted. So for a hat, it's not as perfect for hats because it doesn't hold shape very well. And I expect my hat will stretch. However, I used a smaller size, the smaller size needle that's practically possible here to prevent the stretching too much. Now, next onto my work in progress projects. I have 2 projects on the go, and typically I like to have more than one project. If I've got a jumper to knit, because jumpers take quite some time to make, and sometimes depending on the design of the jumper, it might require a bit more time than normal, and I find myself I can get a little bit bored with just working through the same project. So I like to have something else on the go. So if I get bored with one, I can switch to another, especially if one is a more complex project. Then I tend to go for something really simple, like something knitted in stockinette stitch or in rib, whether it's a scarf or blanket, whatever. So right now my simple project is this scarf, which I'm knitting. It's a very simple scarf. It's knitted in 2x2 rib. I'm knitting this as a gift. And so far, it depends how well my other projects go. So far, I've made about 50 centimeters of the scarf, and I've got quite a fair bit still to go. So I think it might, depending how my other projects go, it might see me through more than one project this spring. I'm using this darker grey colour and combined with a lighter grey colour. I think the 2 colours work reasonably well together, and will be a nice scarf for winter. I also found that as I'm combining the colours, because I'm not breaking yarn here, it's all knitted all the way through into colours, so ignore these strands here, they'll be hidden, they'll be tidied away when I finish the scarf. I find that I join the yarn on this side here, but also on this side doesn't look much different, so you can't tell which side the yarn is joined, and I think it looks quite neat. So so the darker grey is worked in 4 rows and the lighter grey is worked in 2 rows. So I find that's an optimal combination and alternation of yarn before it starts to become a bit too obvious that we are changing yarn and becomes a little bit too messy. The yarn I'm using for this scarf is from Drops, and it's also soft tweed yarn. The content of this yarn is exactly the same as the Rowan yarn. I find that the Rowan soft tweed is a lot softer and more easy to break, yet the Drops yarn is coarser, it's thicker, and it's more sturdier. So this yarn is probably 3 times more expensive than this one. And if I had a choice, I probably would go for a scarf. I would go for this yarn. It's feels very nice to touch. It's not itchy and feels really nice to skin. And just going back to my hat here, I mentioned that I use this hat when I go running. So now we're into spring. Obviously, the weather's warmer. I don't find I need this hat because I'm not cold. But in February, when the weather was quite cold, I found that the hat was not only keeping me warm, but also when after the run, when I was cooling down, the hat also felt quite nice and wasn't itchy, because sometimes wool can become itchy if we get hot. This type wool I found was quite pleasant felt quite pleasant against the skin. Did not itch at all. Not sure, can't say anything about this yarn from Drops. However, the content of this yarn is exactly the same as the one from Rowan, so I'm hopeful that this this also will be quite nice against skin. And my current big project that I'm working on is this smitten pattern from Rowan. And the story of this pattern, how I found this pattern, was on the Rowan website. I wanted to knit something with cashmere for spring because yarn is a perfect type of yarn for cooler months such as spring, but when you don't want something too warm. Christmas time, Rowan had sale on the cashmere yarn, so I decided to have a go. So then I browsed to see what patterns they have on the website and what I might fancy to make. Found this pattern called Smitten. Quite liked the look of it, and the design of it looked like it would hopefully suit me. Unfortunately, with knitting patterns, we can't always tell if it would suit us or not as a final product, because unlike in a shop, we can try an outfit and then make a decision whether we wanted to buy. With knitting patterns, we commit a lot of time and money and effort to make a project which we don't know whether it will suit us or not. So I quite like the way it sits on the model, and hopefully it will be a good fit once I finished it. So at the moment, what I managed to make so far is the back piece. So this all doesn't look very presentable because I haven't completed it, so it looks kind of the sides curl. But this is the back piece. Everything is knitted separately. The back and the front and the sleeves are worked separately and then joined together at the end. I found when I started knitting the left piece and the right piece, I found that my tension was different. I ended up with different heights of my knitting. So they ended up undoing my left piece. I reknitted it and then joined the two pieces on my circular needle. Here are about at the same level, and from this point onwards, when I worked up to the sleeve opening, I'm going to knit these two pieces together so that I can control the tension a little bit better, and I can also check the height of my pieces, because I think it's quite important to make sure that the pieces are aligned, because these diagonals are knitted in opposite directions. Tension can be a tricky thing to achieve, to make sure you've got even tension on both sides. Another issue I found with this pattern is that the dimension is not given up to is given to the kind of full length of the garment, but the pattern doesn't give you the dimension for example, from bottom to the sleeve opening, which caused me an issue with my tension, but I've managed to work around it by knitting the two pieces simultaneously. And I think I'm going to do exactly the same thing when I knit sleeves. With regards to the yarns, I've already mentioned this cardigan is knitted in cashmere yarn. The cashmere yarn is from Rowan. It was in sale Christmas time, and it was quite a good price for this type yarn, as cashmere is quite expensive. It's quite an expensive type yarn. It's very nice to touch. It's very soft, but has a very soft buttery feel. It helps to create stitches of nice definition, nice yarn to work with. These are all my projects for now. I've got a few more ideas that I would like to work on, most of which are going to be my designs. So in spring and summer, I'm going to be knitting my own designs, which I'll be sharing with you, and hopefully you will enjoy watching those and maybe get some inspirations for yourself as well. If you managed to get this far in this video, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye for now.